February 26, 2024 began like any other school day in Kissimmee, Florida, until 13-year-old Madeline Soto never made it to class. Her disappearance triggered a search that gripped the community, but behind the headlines lay a far darker truth. 13-year-old Madeline Soto lived in Kissimmee, Florida, a quiet suburb just south of Orlando. She was a student at Hunters Creek Middle School, where she was enrolled in the 6th grade. On the morning of February 26, 2024, Madeline was reported missing after failing to arrive at school. Her disappearance would soon reveal a devastating truth, one that had been hidden in plain sight. Madeline's life, like so many children's, was shaped by the adults around her. She lived with her mother, Jennifer Soto, and her mother's boyfriend, Stephan Michael Stearns. Jennifer Soto has spoken publicly about her daughter in interviews with detectives. She described Madeline as quiet and reserved, someone who didn't always speak up. In one interview, she said Madeline, quote, didn't like confrontation and would often keep things to herself. That detail, though brief, paints a picture of a child who may have been sensitive, introspective, and perhaps cautious in interactions with adults. There is limited public information about Madeline's personality, interests, or friendships. Her young age and the sensitivity of the case have understandably led to privacy protections. But what we do know is this: she was a child, a middle schooler, and someone who should have been focused on homework, friends, and growing up, not navigating the trauma that investigators say she endured for years. Madeline's biological father, Tyler Wallace, spoke publicly for the first time in March 2024. In an emotional interview, he said, quote, I love what I had of her, but we're supposed to have so much more. His grief was palpable. He described feeling helpless, having been separated from Madeline for much of her life. Wallace's words offered a rare glimpse into the emotional toll this case has taken, not just on the public, but on those who loved her most. February 26, 2024 began like any other Monday in Kissimmee, Florida. Madeline Soto was expected at Hunters Creek Middle School where she was enrolled, but by the end of the day, she still hadn't arrived. Her absence triggered a series of events that would unravel into one of the most disturbing child homicide investigations in recent Florida history. Madeline was reported missing around 8 p.m. by her mother, Jennifer Soto. According to investigators, Jennifer had been asleep that morning when her boyfriend, Stephan Stearns, took the family dog out for a walk. She later told detectives that she hadn't seen Madeline before falling back asleep. Stearns claimed he had dropped Madeline off near the school that morning, but surveillance footage would later prove otherwise. Jennifer Soto went to school around 4:30 p.m. to pick up her daughter, only to be told that Madeline never arrived. Her phone was still at home. While Madeline had reportedly run away in the past, this disappearance felt different. Her absence was prolonged, unexplained, and deeply concerning. The next day, February 27th, the Orange County Sheriff's Office issued a public alert asking for help locating Madeline. Investigators began interviewing Stearns, who gave conflicting accounts of where he had dropped her off and what he did afterwards. Detectives noted inconsistencies in his story, prompting him to revise his version of events multiple times. On February 28th, the third day of the search, law enforcement launched a large-scale effort to locate Madeline. Deputies combed through wooded areas, followed up on tips, and searched locations tied to Stearns' movements. Sheriff John Mina later revealed that Madeline had expressed a desire to live in the woods when she turned 13, a detail found in her phone's data. But despite extensive efforts, the search came up empty. Authorities also uncovered surveillance footage from the morning of February 26. At 7:35 a.m., Stearns was seen discarding items into a dumpster at the apartment complex where he lived with Jennifer and Madeline. Inside the dumpster, detectives found Madeline's backpack and her school-issued laptop. Before his name became synonymous with one of Florida's most disturbing child homicide cases, Stephan Stearns was, by all appearances, an ordinary man. But as investigators dug deeper into his past, a troubling pattern began to emerge, one marked by deception, instability, and a long history of manipulation. Stephen Stearns was born and raised in Florida. According to interviews with his parents, Chris and Deborah Stearns, he suffered a traumatic brain injury during a car accident in his youth. As a result, he was placed on an individual education plan throughout his schooling. His father described him as emotionally erratic and unpredictable, often struggling to regulate his behavior due to the medications he was prescribed. Despite these challenges, Stern appeared to function normally in adulthood. He worked at Disney for about a year, and for a brief period, his life seemed to be on an upward trajectory. But that stability didn't last. He left the job, began experiencing financial difficulties, and eventually moved in with Jennifer Soto, Madeline's mother. Stearns paid $600 a month in rent, though his father later revealed he often covered those payments himself. Stearns' relationship with Jennifer Soto was fraught with dysfunction. According to his parents, Jennifer was dealing with mental health issues and substance abuse. Deborah Stearns described her as, quote, bipolar, bisexual, a drug addict, and claimed she had shared drugs with Stephan. Quote, they were feeding each other and not in a positive way, Chris Stearns said. Both parents expressed concern that Jennifer was a destructive influence on their son, and that their relationship was marked by volatility and codependency. When investigators began unraveling the circumstances surrounding Madeline Soto's disappearance, one of the most disturbing revelations was how close her alleged killer had been to her, physically, emotionally, and for years. Stephen Stearns wasn't a stranger. He lived in the same home as Madeline. He shared her space, and according to law enforcement, he used that proximity to groom and abuse her over an extended period. Even after Stephen and Jennifer ended their romantic relationship, he remained in the home. He took over one of the upstairs bedrooms and continued living there as a tenant and close companion to both Jennifer and Madeline. According to interviews released by law enforcement, Jennifer Soto told detectives that she had asked Madeline and Stearns to sleep in the upstairs bedroom together the night before Madeline disappeared, so she could get a good night's sleep. This arrangement, she said, wasn't unusual. It was part of their routine. Investigators viewed this as a major red flag. Why was a 13-year-old girl sharing a bedroom with her mother's adult ex-boyfriend, and why had no one questioned this sooner? Detectives later uncovered that Stearns had been sexually abusing Madeline for years. Digital forensic analysis of his phone and cloud storage revealed more than 1,500 images and videos depicting Madeline in sexual acts. Some of these materials dated back to when she was just 8 years old. These files were stored in his Google Drive and on devices recovered from the home. Investigators also found over 35,000 images of child sexual abuse material on a USB drive belonging to Stearns, though none of those images featured Madeline. In addition to the digital evidence, investigators recovered physical items from the home and surrounding areas. They searched Stearns' father's storage unit in Northport, Florida, after learning that Stearns had visited the location using Jennifer's car. Cadaver dogs were deployed, though no physical evidence was recovered from the site. Still, the visit raised suspicions about Stearns' movements and intentions in the days following Madeline's disappearance. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Stearns had unfettered access to Madeline for years. He lived in her home and he showed her bedroom. He manipulated her, documented the abuse, and took calculated steps to conceal his actions. And despite warning signs, no one intervened. And with that, we're going to move on to Jennifer Soto. As investigators began piecing together the events surrounding Madeline Soto's disappearance, one of the most revealing sources of information came from the interviews conducted with her mother, Jennifer Soto. These conversations, recorded and released by law enforcement, offered a troubling glimpse into the household Madeline lived in. Now back to the investigation. Law enforcement quickly began reviewing surveillance footage from the school and surrounding areas. What they found contradicted Stearns' account. Madeline never entered the school building. She wasn't seen on campus. Instead, footage showed Stearns driving with Madeline slumped over in the passenger seat of his vehicle. That image, haunting and unexplained, became a turning point in the investigation. Detectives interviewed Stearns multiple times. His story shifted with each conversation. He initially claimed to have dropped Madeline off near the school entrance, then later said he left her at a nearby intersection. When pressed, he admitted to factory resetting his phone that morning, claiming it was accidental. Investigators viewed this as a deliberate attempt to erase incriminating data. On February 28th, just 2 days after Madeline was reported missing, Stearns was arrested, not yet for murder, but on charges of sexual battery and possession of child sexual abuse material. As mentioned earlier, a forensic search on his phone and cloud storage revealed over 1,500 images and videos depicting Madeline in sexual acts. Investigators also found more than 35,000 images of child sexual abuse on a USB drive belonging to Stearns. That same day, surveillance footage captured Stearns discarding items into a dumpster at the Veteran Bay apartment complex, where he lived with Jennifer and Madeline. Inside the dumpster, detectives recovered Madeline's backpack and her school-issued laptop. These items, discarded just hours after she was last seen, were critical pieces of evidence. The search for Madeline intensified. Law enforcement combed through wooded areas, followed digital trails, and tracked Stearns' movements. Then, on March 1st, 2024, 5 days after Madeline was reported missing, her body was discovered in a wooded area in rural Osceola County. The location was remote, far from her school and home. The Kissimmee Police Department took over the case as it transitioned from a missing persons investigation to a homicide. The medical examiner later confirmed that Madeline had died of strangulation. Investigators believe she was already dead by the time Stearns was seen discarding her belongings on the morning of February 26. The timeline was chillingly precise. The evidence, digital, physical, and behavioural, pointed to premeditation. In jailhouse phone calls recorded after his arrest, Stearns never denied the allegations. Instead, he claimed investigators were, quote, artificially inflating everything. When asked about the last day he saw Madeline alive, he said, quote, it was shaping up to be a great week and a great visit. His tone was detached and his language evasive. Detectives described Stearns as manipulative and calculating. He isolated Madeline, groomed her, and concealed years of abuse. Even after being confronted with overwhelming evidence, he remained evasive. His interviews with police were marked by contradictions, deflections, and a refusal to take responsibility. Now, I just want to quickly talk about Jennifer Soto. When investigators were piecing together the events surrounding Madeline Soto's disappearance, one of the most revealing sources of information came from the interviews conducted with her mother, Jennifer Soto. These conversations, recorded and released by law enforcement, offer a troubling glimpse into the household Madeline lived in, and the blind spots that may have allowed years of abuse to go unnoticed. Jennifer Soto initially told detectives that she had no reason to suspect her boyfriend, Stephan Stearns, of wrongdoing. She described him as someone she trusted, someone who had been part of her life and her daughter's for years. When asked about Madeline's whereabouts on the morning of February 26, 2024, Jennifer said she had been asleep. She claimed that Stearns had taken the dog out and that she assumed Madeline had gone to school as usual. But as the investigation progressed, Jennifer's statements began to shift. Detectives confronted her with surveillance footage showing Stearns discarding items in the dumpster, items that turned out to be Madeline's. They also revealed that Stearns had factory reset his phone that morning, and that forensic analysis had recovered images and videos of him sexually abusing Madeline, dating back to when she was just 8 years old. Jennifer's reaction to this evidence was, in the words of many observers, baffling. In one interview, she expressed disbelief, not at the abuse itself, but at the idea that Stearns could be responsible. Quote, I wanted to believe he was innocent. He's a master liar, end quote. Even after being shown explicit photos of her daughter on Stearns' devices, Jennifer struggled to accept the reality. Quote, he's been grooming and abusing my child. She eventually admitted, breaking down in tears. But the delay in reaching that conclusion and the years of proximity between Stearns and Madeline raised serious questions. Detectives asked Jennifer why she hadn't noticed anything unusual. Her responses were inconsistent. At one point, she said Madeline had never indicated that anything was wrong. At another, she acknowledged that her daughter had become more withdrawn, more quiet. She described Madeline as someone who, quote, didn't like confrontation and who often kept things to herself. But when pressed on whether she'd asked Madeline directly about a relationship with Stearns, Jennifer admitted she hadn't. The interviews also revealed troubling details about their household dynamic. Jennifer told investigators that she had asked Madeline and Stearns to sleep in the upstairs bedroom the night before Madeline disappeared so that she could get a good night's sleep. This arrangement wasn't unusual, though. It was part of their routine. But to detectives, it was a red flag. Jennifer's responses throughout the interview suggested a pattern of negligence. Not necessarily malicious, but deeply damaging. She failed to recognize signs of grooming. She allowed Stearns unfettered access to her daughter, and even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, she hesitated to accept the truth. Her denial, her passivity, and her failure to protect Madeline became central themes in the investigation. This segment isn't about assigning blame, it's about understanding how systematic failures began at home. It's about recognizing the importance of vigilance, of listening to children, and of questioning the people we allow into their lives. Teachers and classmates also later told investigators that Madeline often appeared anxious and withdrawn. Her PE teacher described her as someone who, quote, always appeared anxious. Other staff noted that she had, quote, sleepy days, where she would put her head down and disengage from class. These weren't isolated moments, though. They were patterns. And while children can have off days, Madeline's behaviour suggested something deeper. One classmate recalled Madeline would sometimes come to school crying. She would complain about her mother or simply say she just, quote, wanted to cry, without offering more. These moments, though brief, were attempts at expression. There were signals, quiet but unmistakable, that Madeline was carrying something heavy. Despite these indicators, no formal reports were made. Licensed counsellors interviewed by media outlets later explained that children in abusive situations often fear retaliation or punishment. They may not disclose abuse directly, especially if the abuser is someone they live with or depend on. Instead, they speak through behaviour, withdrawal, fatigue, and emotional outbursts. Madeline's signals were textbook examples of this kind of silent distress. The question that lingers is, could this have been prevented? If a teacher had asked more questions, if a counsellor had followed up, if someone had connected the dots between Madeline's emotional state and her home life, the signs were there, the patterns were visible, but the system failed to respond. But this isn't about assigning blame to individual educators. It's about recognising the gaps in how we protect children. It's about understanding that abuse doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it whispers through tears in a hallway, through a child putting her head down in a class, through a quiet, I just want to cry. Madeline Soto deserved to be heard. She deserved to be seen, not just as a student, but as a child in need of help. Her story is a painful reminder that vigilance matters, that listening matters, and that the smallest red flag can be the beginning of a life-saving intervention. By the time Stephen Stearns stood before a judge in July 2025, the evidence against him was overwhelming. He had been indicted for the first-degree premeditated murder of 13-year-old Madeline Soto, along with 60 counts of sexual battery and possession of child sexual abuse material. The case had gripped Florida and drawn national attention, not just for its brutality, but for the years of abuse that had gone undetected. The Ninth Judicial Circuit State Attorney's Office had announced early on that they intended to seek the death penalty. Prosecutors argued that Stearns' crimes met the criteria for capital punishment. They were premeditated, heinous, and involved the sexual abuse of a minor over an extended period. But as the trial approached, Stearns entered into a plea agreement that would change the course of the proceedings. On July 22, 2025, Stearns pleaded no contest to the charge of first-degree murder. He also pleaded guilty to all 60 counts of sexual battery and possession of child sexual abuse material. The plea deal meant that the case would not go to trial. There would be no cross-examination, no witness testimony, no public airing of the evidence. For Madeline's family, this spared them the trauma of reliving the details in court. The sentencing was swift and severe. Stearns received 21 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judge made it clear he would never walk free again. The courtroom was quiet as the sentence was handed down. There was no dramatic outbursts, no final statements from Stearns. just the weight of the law closing in on a man who had stolen a child's life and documented her suffering. For Madeline's biological father, Tyler Wallace, the sentencing brought a measure of justice, but not closure. In interviews, he expressed heartbreak over the years he lost with his daughter and the future they were supposed to share. Quote, "I love what I had of her, but we were supposed to have so much more." Jennifer Soto, Madeline's mother, was not charged in connection with the case, but her role and her failure to protect Madeline remain a point of public scrutiny. In interviews, she acknowledged that Stearns had been grooming and abusing her daughter and described him as a master liar. Her statements, though emotionally raw, raised questions about how much she knew and when. The plea deal closed the legal chapter of Madeline Soto's case, but for advocates, educators, and survivors, it opened a broader conversation about child protection, mandated reporting, and the systems that failed to intervene. Madeline Soto was just 13 years old. She was a daughter, a student, and a child growing up in Kissimmee, Florida. Her life was quiet, largely undocumented, and heartbreakingly brief. But her story, now etched into public memory, demands more than grief. It demands remembrance, it demands accountability, and it demands change. There are few public details about who Madeline was outside of the investigation. We don't know her favourite colour, her hobbies, or what she dreamed about at night. But we do know she was described as quiet, reserved, and someone who didn't like confrontation. We know she cried at school. We know she kept things to herself, and we know those signals, those small, aching signs, were missed. Madeline's death was not just a result of one man's violence. It was the result of systematic failure. A failure of recognizing grooming, a failure to act on behavioral red flags, a failure to protect a child who was visibly struggling. Her case is a painful reminder that abuse often hides in plain sight, and that silence, denial, and routine can be its greatest allies. But remembrance is not passive. It's not just about mourning. It's about honouring Madeline by refusing to let her story fade. It's about asking hard questions. How did this happen? Why didn't anyone intervene? What can we do differently? Advocacy begins with awareness. It begins with listening to children, not just when they speak, but when they withdraw, when they cry, and when they change. It begins with training educators, counsellors, and caregivers to recognise signs of abuse and to act decisively. It begins with holding systems accountable, not just after tragedy, but before it. There are organisations working every day to protect children from abuse, to support survivors, and to reform the systems that failed Madeline. If you're listening and wondering what you can do, start there. Learn about mandated reporting laws in your area. Support child advocacy centres. Share Madeline's story, not for shock, but for change. Madeline Soto deserved safety, she deserved joy, and she deserved a future. While we cannot give her those things now, we can fight to ensure that other children are protected, that silence is broken, that justice is not just a courtroom outcome, but a lived reality. This episode is for Madeline, for every child who has been silenced, for every survivor still wanting to be heard. May we remember, may we act, and may we never look away again. Thank you for listening.